Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Squid Game Season 2, Episode 1. Patrick Klepek and I have just watched this episode, so it's super fresh in our mind. No detailed recap or anything here, uh, but you're going to get our raw reactions, and then we're going to watch more of the show next week, possibly the week after if we can't fit it all in next week. But Patrick Klepek, it's been 3 years since Squid Game Season 1. We obviously discussed Squid Game Season 1 for our bonus episodes at decodingtv.com. And you and I both enjoyed visiting the show again. For me, I visited again, you for the first time. A lot of questions about what this season would be like. Now that we've seen the premiere episode of Season 2, Episode 1, are you glad the show's back, Patrick Klepek?
I'm of two minds.
Yeah.
I think this first episode was pretty terrific, tense, interesting. The ending sequence is an all-timer, like one of my favorite moments from the show of what I've seen up to this moment. But boy, David, I have real concerns about what this show's interested in doing, saying, maybe not saying, but doing, where it wants to spend its time over the course of this season. And I'm even more concerned over the fact that the season 3 is already in the can. And I am really, really concerned about where they're going to end season 2, which feels like it's going to be a part 1 situation. So it's interesting. If I would just like, did you love this episode? I did. I genuinely love this episode. Yeah. And yet where it leaves us and where it seems like the show is going to spend its time, I'm worried about the world building, David. I'm worried about the world building, but I'm curious where you ended up.
I think we're in exactly the same place. This episode is awesome. It's just, wow, it's great to have the creator of Squid Game back making television again. The guy is clearly extremely good at it.
Yeah.
And we get another episode from his brilliant mind to enjoy. And so I'm excited about that. But yes, I think that it does feel like we're heading back to the island. Considering we spent most of this episode trying to get back to the island. And once we get back to the island, the sort of thematic directions I think the show can go in is going to be very limited in terms of how different it can be from the first season, right? So I think the worst case scenario is it's just going to be a rehash of season 1 thematically. And is that the worst thing in the world? No, it's not like that would be terrible, but it feels like a lot of work for that, right? Now, who knows? Maybe the show will surprise us.
Yeah.
But so far, I'm skeptical. That said, I think it's still going to be an enjoyable show. I think we're still going to enjoy watching it and talking about it here on Decoding TV. But the season 1 felt like such a complete idea, other than the ending.
Yeah.
Felt like such a complete idea, like a clear thesis. And season 2 feels like it's going to just re-say the thesis again, which is fine. But I think you would hope for something more and different with something like this. I also want to say one other thing, which is I think the premiere of season 2 shows clear signs of them not knowing that they were going to do a season 2. You know what I'm saying? And this is a well-known fact that the creator has said he was not interested or did not know he was going to, or had no plans to continue Squid Game past season 1. He kind of wanted to end it on that note that it was ended at season 1. And then obviously the show became wildly successful and Netflix backed up a Brinks truck full of money to his house. And he said, okay, I think I can find it in me to make a season 2. But there are a bunch of things in this episode that are very obviously they wouldn't have done it that way if they knew they were going to tell the story this way, and they wouldn't have made season 1 that way if they knew they were going to tell season 2 in this way. And we'll talk about a few of those as they go on, but I did feel the narrative strained under the pressure of trying to continue the show. So okay, let's get into it. First of all, I don't know if you noticed, there is a Squid Game version of the Netflix logo, Patrick Klepek. Which is rare. I think they've done that a few times. I don't think this is the first time they've done it, but it's rare when they do it, and it's clearly an acknowledgement of, hey, this is one of the greatest, like the biggest shows in the world. Still is, to a large degree. And we are inextricably tying our brand to it with this opening. The episode begins with, in my opinion, a completely unnecessary scene where Jihan is still at the airport, gets another call from the same guy as at the end of the first season, and saying, like, don't come find me, go back, get back on the plane. And Jihan gets in the cab and drives off, and he's on a quest to find the people who make the Squid Game and put an end to it. Which, by the way, side note, really feels like if you're going to put people through a series of trials where they need to murder people and then give them seemingly unlimited resources, it feels like would have come up sooner that one of them might be angry at you and use their resources to get back at you. But whatever. Jihan's the first. I can buy that. There's also a moment where he goes into a bathroom and cuts out a tracking chip from his ear, so they can't find him anymore. There's a funny scene when a boy enters while he's doing that. And then I remembered, hey, remember Squid Game before we got to the island was actually pretty funny? Like Squid Game season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a lot of humor in this episode as well, juxtaposed with some of the most horrifying things you've ever seen. And that's the Squid Game formula, is just really funny stuff next to, wow, that's horrific. And it creates this really unique mix and feeling that you get when you watch the show. Any thoughts on the opening scene, Patrick Klepek, before we cut to 2 years later?
I'll be able to sprinkle this in throughout our discussion of this episode because, David, I sent you a video a couple of days ago of my 4-year-old playing Red Light, Green Light with the, I'm sure, Netflix-approved Squid Game iconography in the video game platform.
Whoever
Roblox.
made it officially licensed it. They're paying like a licensing fee.
100%.
It's all above board, right?
Honestly, I'm pretty sure Netflix is totally cool with it. It's been like spectacular free marketing for them to have all this stuff in those spaces. Anyway, my 4-year-old is playing Red Light, Green Light. And so I sent video of that to you. And then I mentioned to them, hey, Dad's got to do a little bit of work this morning. And then, we're all going to hang out and do stuff. And so I've got to watch this TV show. And my 8-year-old says, great. Can I just go on my tablet? Like, yes. Goodbye. I will see you in 2 hours. And my 4-year-old's like, what are you watching? I'm like, well, I gotta watch this show called Squid Game. She's like, oh, Red Light, Green Light. I'm like, yeah. You are correct. She's like, can I watch it with you? I'm like, well, it's not in English. Like you're not gonna be able to. She's like, what do they speak? I was like, oh, it's a language called Korean. She's like, I think I can figure it out. I'm like, okay. All right, look. This is a true test of my wife and I's philosophy. Is if our kids say they can watch something, like kids are generally better at telling you what they're uncomfortable with than you being a barometer. There are always limits to that. Every parent is different, but generally we let our kids walk up to a line and walk away from it. Than it is us always setting arbitrary lines. Anyway, I'm like, I'll just pause this if this is going to get out of control, and I will just tell her that. She can't watch it anymore. She took herself away from it because after about 10 minutes where she was patiently asking lots of who's that? Who's that? What are they doing? Why are they upset? Why is he bleeding? She eventually said, like, it was so funny. She's like, so when are the squids going to show up? I'm like, kiddo, it's like, do you know how like checkers or like games? She's like, yeah, like it's just called Squid Game. Like there aren't, as far as I know, any squids. Ugh. Well, tell me when the squid shows up. And she left and went and watched. But don't you worry. She came back for Russian roulette and rock, paper, scissors, which amazing.
I
can tell you about when we get there.
I cannot wait. Also, for those who don't remember or know, Squid Game refers to the shape of the playfield for the culminating game of the original series of Squid Games.
Yes.
So, anyway, no actual squids involved. Okay.
Not yet. I mean, they do enough seasons of this, David. Right. You get desperate.
Yeah. 2 years later. 2 years later, Jun-ho, the cop from the first season, he's alive. He survived getting shot in the shoulder and falling into the ocean.
Boo, show, boo.
Why boo, Patrick? You're always telling me if you don't see a body, it means he's not dead.
That may be logically consistent with the storytelling tropes, but it doesn't make me happy in this instance.
So Jun-ho is now writing tickets. He's a traffic cop. And there's a
Wait, can we back up? Is
Yeah.
this one of those instances in which they wouldn't have done season 1 the way they did?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
is this okay?
Yeah.
So I don't understand if you're going to get there, but I was wondering, like, is this one of David's like main issues so far? Is this specific plot point?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, you get some cool. There's a cool concept of him searching for the front man again, searching for the island again.
I
right?
love
Like
it. I love
that's
it.
kind of cool, right? And he has this map, and he's crossing out all the little islands, and that's fun. But you have this. Like, I thought half of this episode was hilarious. Most of the time, intentionally hilarious. And there's this scene where Jun-ho is sitting with his old boss, I guess. And his old boss is trying to get him to come back to Major Crimes. And then he goes on this extremely painful explanation for why Jun-ho is now a traffic cop. He says, look, I had the Coast Guard search the area where you were found for days. We never got those photos that you sent in season 1.
Well, they said the data reception wasn't good. That's his brother did point that out in season 1.
He's saying like he's delivering this extremely contortionary, painful explanation for why nothing Jun-ho did in season 1.
He found a buoy. He found a buoy. Why are there buoys out in that island, David?
Yeah, the story is Jun-ho falls off the cliff, survives the fall, grabs onto a buoy, and then like a fisherman, or this captain guy is in a boat and happens to find him, hanging onto a buoy. That's the story I think we're able to put together, right?
I think so.
And if they knew that they wanted season 2 to be Jun-ho and Jihan are looking for the island, would they have had Jun-ho be shot and fall off the cliff? You know what I'm saying? I just don't believe that that's how they would have done that.
Or if they were going to do it, like have the brother go retrieve. You know what I mean? Like some sort of like go retrieve him. Like like his brother actually. Well, he shot him, but he feels a little bit bad about it, which he did. Like in the moment, you can see there is like some regret and remorse over this is how the relationship is ending. And look, I'm all we talked to Skeleton Crew, like throwaway logic in the service of good storytelling. And maybe this is the show having to eat its vegetables. Like, okay, we didn't leave the breadcrumbs because the show didn't want to to leave breadcrumbs. Yeah. So its own strengths have become at least a structural weakness in the beginning. And at the end of the day, if it tells a good story, like who cares? It doesn't matter.
But it's actually funny. You can imagine if this was like an American show where he's delivering this exposition, it would be really funny because he's saying literally nothing you did in season 1 made any impact whatsoever.
It's exciting though. Good story.
Put it in a book. Literally, Jun-ho has advanced 0 since season 1, episode 2, right? Or whatever.
Actually, he's behind. Like he's at least before he had a way of getting to the island. Now he doesn't have the island. We're in negative territory here.
So anyway, I thought that was pretty funny, pretty amusing. I don't know if it was intentionally so. Anyway, Jihan is living in a sketchy hotel, old boy style. Like he has all these monitors that can see everything. He's having nightmares about the front man, and he is obsessed with finding the recruiter that played that game with him on the subway. He's hired a private investigator, and he is trying to find this guy, and they are fanning out and looking at every single subway thing. And at first I thought the guy was fleecing him, right? Because he's saying, oh yeah, definitely. We definitely got to find this guy. Give me this bag of money and we'll find
more
him.
money. Oh, I'll find more guys.
More money. But then he goes into the van with 30 guys in it. And he's explaining the situation to them. And it is hilarious because Jihan is single-handedly keeping this guy in business, right?
Yeah.
He's putting my kids through college. He's saying, look, I think Jihan kind of nuts, but also he's like, if it wasn't for him, you guys would not be employed right now. And they actually have a good system where they actually need to go to the stations, and he has a whole sort of network of cell phones and that he's put on his dashboard, and they all text him selfies from the station that day to prove that they were there and actually did
group chat. I think they explained like most other shows, and maybe this is a reflection of like the fact that there's like game design logic. So there's kind of maybe the design, like the series creator here is actually like, hey, I'm going to think through logistically, how would this work? When you could just hand wave it and have a bunch of cuts to guys going in and out of subway car. But I appreciated that there was a logic that made sense for like, how would you actually go about trying to find this guy. And it makes it kind of more exciting that the logic of the search in a way, even if the show could have easily just said, and then they went and searched. But I liked seeing the steps, and it made search over with the selfie way more dramatic. It makes the discovery way more dramatic. So I really, I'm with you. I appreciated that point.
Yeah, and it made it plausible. Like, oh, he's actually not just a rich person handing out money indiscriminately. He actually has some kind of system for making sure this is actually getting done. So there's some competence there that I appreciate. Okay? Anyway, as the episode goes on, we see Jun-ho go out in a boat with the captain. He's trying to find the island. He's unsuccessful at finding the island, and that's but you could tell he's really, really committed to the idea. Meanwhile, Ji-hun and his men are still looking, and they're having a difficult time finding the recruiter. This is another thing, by the way, Patrick, is like the whole ending of season 1 is Ji-hun sees the recruiter at the subway again, right? And that's how he knows the games are still going. And then all of a sudden, the recruiter is impossible to find for 2 years. It's like, I think if it was going to be Ji-hun's looking for the recruiter, he wouldn't have, like, if they knew that they would be opening it with this way, they wouldn't have had him find the recruiter at the end of season 1, is my guess, right?
Yes, and it just sort of strains the whole thing. Like, it works dramatically where we end up in the episode, but it strains reason that this highly sophisticated game that's been going on for, from what I understand, decades. Like, if he's fanning out people every day for 2 years or during these summer periods, that they wouldn't pick up on that. It's something, you know what I mean? Like, why would the recruiter even go out at a certain? It's not like it's not as though they're we're waiting in the back and then searching one day because we know the recruiter comes out on that night,
right,
he's
right,
like a horror villain or something like that. So all of that feels a little silly, especially I would have been more satisfied with it if he didn't find the recruiter. Like, if we're doing it from a narrative perspective, it's like him actually finding him feels deeply coincidental and not that logical. Whereas him not finding him and having to find some other way to find the recruiter, or the recruiter just finding him, and be like, I know that you've been looking for me this whole, you know what I mean? Something like that. I mean, it's fine. It was dramatic and it works, but it strains the logic of this highly sophisticated organization that it would just let this guy get caught at some point.
Well, yeah, I agree, because you're saying they would have, my interpretation was originally, they know Ji-hun's after them, so they're gonna hold the recruiter back. But then that doesn't then make sense later on when the recruiter shows up.
Right.
So
that said, he's got the card in there that's the invitation. So is that the invitation for the recruiter, or do they know all along that if he won the game? So I don't know. Maybe we'll know more about what transpired here. But I don't know. Whatever. Logic.
But
aside,
my point being, season 1 ends with this really cool scene with the recruiter.
Yes.
Right? Where he sees the recruiter, he's shocked to see the recruiter.
It's a gut punch.
He runs after the recruiter, and the recruiter's just on the subway, driving, the subway's moving away, and it's that's a badass exit for that character. And I just think that when they were making the show, they're thinking that's the last we're ever going to see of that character ever, and now they need to explain, rather poorly, in my opinion, why the recruiter only shows up this one time, and also doesn't seem to know that Ji-hun is looking for him, or else probably things would play out differently.
And he needs a tragic backstory, which I feel like is going to be a theme of this season. Characters that were mysterious before now have a sad backstory.
Eventually, they find the guy. Right? They find the guy. It's actually a very hilarious moment when they find the guy. And you see he's the whole game on the subway with the throwing of the square things. That's only part of the stuff that he likes to do. He also likes buying pastries by the dozens and lottery tickets, and going into places where there's lots of homeless people and offering them a choice, bread or lottery. And then once most of them choose lottery, he dumps all the bread out and stomps on it like a child. It's pretty hardcore. You can tell this guy is a true believer in what he does. He's not just doing this for the paycheck, right? He is doing this because he believes in degrading and dehumanizing these poor people.
Mm-hmm.
And there you go. The organization running the Squid Games, they have a committed worker base, we should say. There's this brief scene with this character named Jun-ho and her boyfriend, and she's at a hospital, and then she vanishes. I think I'm not even going to talk about that really. We'll speculate on that more later on when the show goes on. But anyway, so they find the guy doing the bread or lottery scam or deal, and then they decide to follow. Two of Ji-hun's private detective minions decide to follow him, and eventually they chase him down. And I just thought their whole dynamic was hilarious. I really enjoyed it, and how you're finding out all this like random backstory about them throughout the time. He says, I officiated your wedding, and of course I would give you the money. It's just really funny as a way of
this sandwich isn't good enough for you. Like, you're getting easy money.
Yeah. Like, would you rather be working construction, which is what you'd be doing anyway?
They didn't have to do any character. Yeah. Like, there's actually no reason to do characterization for these two guys, but I'm glad it did. Like, it's if you're gonna, this season, it sure seems like is gonna operate at a slower speed, and I don't necessarily agree with that. But if you're going to do that, give me good characterization alongside it, and especially for those two thugs, like, I think that happens really well.
Agreed. So anyway, they're chasing the recruiter down. He gets the jump on them, knocks them both out. And that's when the funny part of the show ends, probably for the rest of the season. So the whole time I'm enjoying, I'm like, oh, this show is so funny. It's so, there's like, what is it? The slapstick humor in the show, people running to try to catch these guys. And there was a funny moment when Ji-hun is trying to catch these guys, and then Jun-ho and his partner pulls him over. And I thought, oh, is this the way these guys' lives are going to intersect again? Because theoretically, I don't remember if Jun-ho ever saw Ji-hun in the game. There's a flashback where we see them interact with each other outside of the game.
That's it, I think.
That's it. Because Jun-ho was in the background. I don't know if he ever saw him in the game. Like, he never saw him in the game, right? Because Ji-hun was one of the final guys, right? So it would be logical that at some point he might see him, but maybe he saw him amongst the hundreds of people and never had an interaction with him or anything like that. Anyway, okay. So the funny part of the show ends, and then the recruiter pits the two guys against each other in a game of rock, paper, scissors with Russian roulette. We actually see two different games of Russian roulette played this episode. There is the Russian roulette that he makes these two guys play, where he then puts in 5 bullets instead of 1 bullet. And then there's the Russian roulette where he and Ji-hun take turns. And I have to say, these are some pretty good Russian roulette scenes, Patrick Klepek. I remember one of my core memories is from watching 24 Season 2. And watching the making of 24 Season 2, and there's a Russian roulette scene in 24 Season 2. And I remember the guy talking about Russian roulette. He's saying, I've seen Russian roulette in movies. There's good Russian roulette scenes. There's bad Russian roulette scenes. And one thing you don't see in a Russian roulette scene is the guy puts the gun to his head, pulls the trigger, and he dies instantly, like in the first time. That's what happens in 24, which I thought was really bold that they decided to do that. And this episode, we have kind of like a couple like variations of Russian roulette, which I thought were kind of interesting. Anyway, solid Russian roulette scenes is what I'm trying to say. Good entries into the pantheon of Russian roulette scenes, right?
Yeah, I agree. This was also this is the sequence where my daughter came back over. And I was like, okay, all right, well, and the first thing she said was, they should just spit that out. Like, they had the gag.
Because they have these like gags, right,
in their mouth. I was like, oh, honey, it's like tied around the back of their heads, and they can't spin it out. And so at this point, I was thinking, like, I'm gonna have to check out like Russian roulette. If nothing happens, it's just people who are scared. Like, if we're gonna see horrific violence, I'm gonna flick this off. But it kept not. The gun kept not going off. So instead, my daughter just kept going 1, 2. Like, in her head, her game was counting how many times the gun didn't go off, and the higher the number, that meant that you were winning. And so she's like, 4, 5. It's cracking me up. And so I'm with you. Like, I think it was it's in theme with the first season and taking obviously like familiar childhood games and putting sadistic sort of spins on them. But here, I thought they did a remarkable job of not just like having the two games interlock with one another, just added a level. Like Russian roulette is pure chance. And that's it's like the glass game from the end of Squid Game season 1, which I didn't like. It looked cool, but it's genuinely unfair, and there's no way to sort of like actually work it as a game. Russian roulette is the exact same thing. There's no skill involved. It is all chance. But here, even if the deck is stacked against you, the fact that they have the rock, paper, scissors. I haven't played this variant of rock, paper, scissors. This was not familiar to me. I've always just played, rock, paper, scissors, and win or lose. But the way, not only is the game variation fun and having them interlock with each other fun, just the way it's shot. Like there's a bunch like during the sequence where the two thugs sort of get it and they're like going back and forth. Yeah. And the setup is
like if you don't split screen and other
the split screens, like the way it's like arranging different shots was spectacular looking. Like it was a real sort of tour de force on like how do you extract maximum tension from a bunch of like stuff you've seen before in various forms. And I thought it did a remarkable job of making that seem really terrifying as it was playing out.
Yeah. And my interpretation of the end of the scene is that the older gentleman purposely forfeits the game.
Yes.
Right. Purposely forfeits the game. So theoretically, the younger gentleman has a chance of living, which we don't even know if that even happens by the end of the episode. So anyway, eventually the recruiter tracks down Jihan. There's a scene where Jun-ho breaks into Sunshine Capital and he starts to get a glimpse of what's going on. I really hope this guy catches on faster than he did last season, dude, because I can't watch another full season of Jun-ho trying to figure out what's happening.
That's we can get into including thoughts, but I worry, David.
Absolutely. So there's a confrontation between Jihan and the recruiter, and they start explaining like, hey, what's going on? And Jihan says, I just wanted to find you so I could thank you. And the recruiter starts talking about his backstory. He used to work the games, which is he was one of those guys that would shoot the people in the games, I think is what is implied. And then he worked his way up to become a recruiter. So much more cushy gig. Doesn't need to wear a mask all the time and in a tracksuit. He can wear a nice suit and be respectable and go into subways and slap people and stomp on pastries.
How many pastries do you think this production went through? Like, how many times did they ask him to stomp on those? Hey, Jeff, bring out another 100 pastries. I got to put them on the ground again and stomp on them.
It's a much sweeter gig. It's funny to consider what the organizational design of this is, but where, hey, if you're promoted, you get to be the recruiter guy. Like you get to travel. You don't need to stay on the island all the time, and you don't need to shoot anyone in the head all day, right? What a nice job.
Lovely.
That said, it seems like for him, he cherishes doing the hands-on work himself. He tells this story about how his dad used to be in the game, and then he shot his dad in the head, and that's how he knew that he was suited for the games. Then they play a game of Russian roulette where they take turns. Only they don't spin the chamber of the gun. They just put one bullet in and take turns shooting each other, shooting themselves in the head until there's only one bullet left and it becomes clear that the recruiter is the one that's going to die. And I have to say, this sequence is awesome. It's just really, really tense. And obviously the theme is who gets to be their own person, right? Jihan is saying, yes, I may have been poor, but at least I am a fully realized, self-actualized human. Whereas you just do whatever these people tell you to. And, that's why I'm better than you. And, and I think the recruiter has the same feeling of you're just a piece of trash that made it out of the garbage bin. You're the fact, and I think he's saying like the fact that you're poor makes you garbage, right? The fact that you're of a lower class means you are not worth anything. Whereas me, look, I'm wearing a suit. And so it's about this game of wits, but it's also kind of who has the bigger will. And you see, when they're on bullet 5, there's an amazing moment when Jihan actually takes the gun and puts it to his head and pulls the trigger. It's
Because he doesn't
genuinely
have to.
badass.
He doesn't have to.
Doesn't
right?
have to.
I mean, there's not like everything that is like it's not like the philosophical discussion is sort of an extension of the game's game design framework. Like, what do these rules exist for?
Yeah.
And why? And rules can exist to create order, and rules can exist to restrict. And there's it's one of the best interminglings of the game design structure and what adherence to it means when extracted out to this explanation of sort of like economic and societal structure and philosophy that I thought was just fantastic, and terrific acting from both sides, both actors.
The recruiter says, "You can kill me." I understand that that's a possibility, and I'm open to it. But by killing me, you admit you're a garbage person that doesn't adhere to the rules. You suck, basically. If you kill me, you suck.
He should have. He should have just fucking pulled the trigger and shot him.
And Jihan says, "Actually, I don't suck. I'm willing to put my life on the line to prove to you that I don't suck. Now you are the one that sucks, sir." I said good day. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, it was probably more satisfying dramatically to have him survive that long, and then the recruiter kills himself. But that was one of those moments where it's like, all right, like, fuck the game, man. Like, just take the gun and shoot. Like, who cares what he thinks about you? That was kind of where I actually felt like it was, in some ways, I think
what we've just learned about Patrick Klepek is he would cheat at this version of Russian roulette. Don't play this version of Russian roulette with Patrick Klepek is a lesson we've all learned today on the podcast.
Well, part of it is because, like, you're just sort of philosophically, I felt like by continuing to participate in the structure that this person has put in front of you, in some ways you're you're acquiescing to like the framework in which they are having the conversation. And for me, it was like, I'm sure there's going to be some.
You're here to break the wheel, Patrick.
You're here to break the wheel. Like, so like, fuck the games. Like, who cares? Like, the people who built these games don't seem like they have like your better interests in mind. Yeah. So it was dramatically delicious, but at some point I'm like, buddy, screw the rules. You gotta take, and I assume he'll do that at some point. I don't think the way he'll get through whatever games and trials he'll be through back on the island, I don't know that he's going to be as obedient this time around.
Indeed. All right, Patrick Klepek, closing thoughts on the Squid Game Season 2 premiere.
Closing thoughts kind of echo my opening thoughts. Great first episode, but my worry is, the way we talked about the first season, it felt like, despite the cliffhanger, a show that left everything on the table. Like, it's a show where they get to an island and then they leave it and then they come back. Season 2 feels like, in some ways, and I'm trying not to be too cynical here, but like, if you were to have pitched Squid Game originally to an American television network or like a streamer, they'd ask, what's your multi-season, like, if this is successful, what's your multi-season arc? And the pacing of season 2 in the first episode feels more in line with, we have to tell a bunch of story over a longer period of time and potentially multiple seasons. Whereas season 1 felt like a gunshot, like a bullet shot out of a gun. That's like, screw it. Like we're telling the story. Like, you could have done season 1.
I thought for sure that we'd be back on the island by now, like by the end of season 1, episode 1.
Yes. And that's what we're doing, a lot of backstory, like, which the first, the first season did that in reverse, right? Like, just get to the premise, like, get to the high concept premise, in that premise, fill in the backstory from there, find ways to do that here. Here, we're doing it much more traditionally. Like the high concept stuff still exists, but we're doing all this backstory. And at the end of the first episode, boy, we don't seem that much closer to getting to the island. Like, we need a plan to get to the island. I was like, is the plan to get there at the end of this season? Can't be that long. But
no, I don't think so.
But the longer it takes to get there, the more I worry about how the pace at which we're doling out story and backstory. But do you find yourself in a similar place?
I think I'm less worried about the pacing, because this was I would say this is a fairly leisurely paced episode, in the sense that not many meta developments happen in this episode, and I still enjoyed the episode greatly, all the same. But I think the question for me for Squid Game season 2 and 3 is the show trying to say anything new or different than it said in season 1?
Right.
And so far, I haven't seen any evidence that it is. Right. Also, by the way, I'm just gonna put this out there. There's stuff from season 1 that is just not addressed yet, and maybe they'll get to it in season 2. So it's very I want to withhold judgment. But Jihan's relationship with her child was like a big deal in season 1. He was supposed to get on the plane to go see them, and are we just to assume he's forgotten that?
Nothing. Not even a reference.
Not even a reference to it.
No phone call. Not a text message.
Also, the people who he hooked up with money at the end of season 1, right? Like the what's her name's brother and what's his name's mom, like, and he gave them a suitcase of money, and I wonder, is that going to be addressed or referenced at all? So yeah, it feels the season 1 connection feels like they really wish they could have redone the finale if they knew that they were going to do it in season 2, because then they wouldn't have ended it the way they did and introduced these plot threads and closed off these other plot threads.
Right.
That said, I'm super excited the show's back. This episode was awesome. It is showing you horrifying, upsetting stuff that you can't see anywhere on TV. And that's, of course, why I'm a big supporter of Squid Game Season 2. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.